Thank you, Martha. Thank you, Nicole, for lining me up this morning. We do have, so this course, Introduction to Construction Management, is we are just going to be briefly touching on several topics. So this is typically a 5-hour class that we do for the Nevada LTAP, and I have pared it down to just try to touch 3 of the main topics there. So we're going to be talking about contract administration, construction administration, and then claims and disputes. So there's a breadth of information that we could get into, and as you can imagine, from a have your coffee and watch a Wednesday webinar kind of stint, we're just going to be touching a few of those. So if you're interested in more information, please reach out to the Kentucky LTAP Center there and let them know, and they can procure that additional content. You have fantastic lecturers there at the University of Kentucky. I'm available. So there's a wealth of information that can be brought in for you if you do desire more information. So I have a poll question for you. We're talking about construction management. Construction management usually begins with the selecting of a contractor. So there's a question for you there. Which contract project delivery method have you used? This should be a multiple answer poll. So please select all of those that you have used previously. You can choose from design bid build, or construction manager at risk. You can also choose other. There are some other options that transportation or public works agencies have chosen.
We'll give you about a minute to answer that.
Yes.
We'll close the poll shortly.
There's also a follow-up question there. Which do you use most often? So you can, if you would please type that answer in the chat box, I will be looking for those responses.
All right, I'm gonna end the poll and share the results.
Very good. And we can see from the poll responses that most of you have used design bid build. A few have experience with design build. Only one person out of 11 responding has construction manager at risk experience. Lyles responded in the chat box that design bid build is the most commonly used contractor selection method. So that is very typical with what we see across the country. Design bid build is our bread and butter type of selection process. So very good. Thank you, Nicole. So our first topic that we're going to talk about is basics of contract administration. And I will invite you, please. Have the results been shared, Nicole? I still see the share results button.
Yes, I've shared them and I've taken it off my screen. So
okay, so I can take it off mine. Very good. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So we're going to talk about the basics of contract administration. And this, I'm sorry, I got sidetracked. I was going to say, please feel free to unmute and talk or ask questions, whatever you would like to do. I will be trying to monitor the chat pod, but there's a lot of moving parts in delivering a Zoom content course. So please feel free to speak up. So basically, when we have a contract delivered, that is usually a project-oriented contract. And so with a project, that initially starts with a problem identified. And unfortunately, in public works type projects, that project is usually to correct some type of defect, either an age-related distress, a capacity improvement, something like that. And so we typically refer to that as the problem being identified or the need being identified. Following that, a project will be established. And so that is usually accompanied with a number for that project, so that allotments can be set against that. People can be hired to work on that. And after the project is established, that work is designed. And so an engineer typically is involved in designing that project. At some point, the project is constructed. This process can take typically several years for a large grade and drain highway widening project to go from need identification through construction. And once that construction project is let to contract and a contractor selected, then we begin to inspect that construction work to assure that it is built according to what our parameters are. And I put two funding bubbles on there to show that the project needs to be funded by a board, a commission, a department, some sort of funding pot. That can be state funds, it can be local funds, it can be federal funds. Hopefully we're all familiar with how transportation projects get developed and funded, parsed into your STIP or long range plan. But my point here is that the project may be funded at multiple times. It's very likely that a project is funded in phases to go along with right-of-way accrual and the design process. So there may be 15% of the total project cost allocated at this design phase, and the remaining 85% for construction may be funded at a later date. So there's a number of ways that transportation authorities begin to work that process to get their projects funded. So wanted to start with that idea of how a project comes into being. Any questions about that? All right. So we ask what type of project delivery methods you're typically familiar with, and this shows the relationship for a design, bid, build, contract delivery. In this relationship, the agency hires usually both the design and inspection engineer, or those may be different entities, and the agency also hires the contractor. And so the agency is acting as the owner. Both the engineer and contractor have independent contracts to work for that agency to do that work. The process is that the project is fully designed, then it's bid, and then it is built. That's the naming convention of that process there. The awardee is typically a pre-qualified bidder, and the agency selects the lowest total bid amount. So that is the contractor that would be selected for that project, is awarded by low bid. In a let's see if I can delete that mark there. Yeah. So in design build, it's a little different development process. In this instance, an agency hires both the contractor and the engineer who have agreed to work together to implement this project. In Tennessee, where I have my experience, the contracting community said this was a beauty contest. It was not a bidding opportunity. It was who could make the agency believe that they could do the best job, which, in my opinion, is favorable. So the awardee in this type of project is typically a rated proposal with minor evaluation factors for cost as compared to the low bid process. So the third type of example that we're going to be talking about is the construction manager at risk model. And in this contracting arrangement, the agency hires both the contractor and the engineer. They're not working for each other. However, they do work very closely. And in this process as well, similar to design build, the contractor is chosen by a rated construction proposal, and cost may be considered as a smaller rating factor compared to experience or innovations proposed in the construction process. So again, in this model, this is an accelerated delivery kind of model where the contractor is able to speak into the design process considerably so that the project can be awarded to minimize risk overall to both the agency and the contractor, enabling both entities to save money and minimize risk. So so relationships among the parties, the agency is typically the owner, and the agency contracts with the consultant for design, the contractor, and the consultant for inspection typically. And so the owner agency is identified as either a state DOT, a local municipality. And so I pulled the construction webpage from the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet just to identify the agency provides lots of policy, procedure, information for the contract development community. So links to materials, standard specifications, construction procurement, project manager's toolbox, lots of things that site manager, lots of entities or components of using their construction method. So that is provided by the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet. I'm sure in a lot of local federal aid projects, you're using Kentucky Transportation Cabinet components and processes to make that work. So as we think about the design, bid, build process, there's an advertisement phase. Once that project is designed, it will be advertised, and government entities have differing processes. I think the requirement for federal aid projects is that they're advertised for at least 21 days. That is to get contractors interested. The contractors submit bids, and those bids are reviewed, opened in public, typically to tell what the low bid value is, so you can see where the bidders are, what the spread is. And this can be a joyous occasion for contractors or an oh heck moment as they realize that maybe their bid is way under their next lowest competitor. So it's often, talking to some of my contractor friends, it's oh heck, what did we miss kind of moment. So through this bids submitted, bids opened in an apparent low bidder fashion, that is determined. Then the agency goes through those bids to identify, is this bidder responsible and responsive? And so those are two different terms dealing with the legal parameters around that bid process. The bid, a low bid is typically recommended to an awarding entity, either a commissioner, a secretary, a funding board. Those could be different in different agencies. An award is made by that awarding official. During the next phase, other required documents are submitted. So the contractor has a certain number of days to submit other requirements. That results in the contract being signed and then a notice to proceed being issued. So that is the typical process for how these design, bid, build projects typically work, at least during the contract initiation stage. The Kentucky Transportation Cabinet again has on their webpage, they've streamlined their advertisement process. Most state laws have been changed to not require so much of a newspaper presence for the advertisement of their bids, but they have listed all the different lettings and the letting dates and what their schedule is. If you click on each one of those letting dates, they will have a call number and contract ID with the county and project description listed, and it will show you who the contract is awarded to. So you can see here that L&M Asphalt Partners Limited, doing business as somebody else, was awarded a couple contracts. The Allen Company, Louisville Paving Company, Schnabel Foundation Company. So several entities have bid and been awarded work under the typical transportation cabinet process. Any questions on what we've covered so far?
I don't see anything.
So I've got a chat question for you. What are the typical requirements for conducting a project? What is a contractor agreeing to when they enter a contract with an agency? What is the so Lyle says a scope of work? Yeah. What else? Very good. Brian says build to agency specs. Yeah. What else? Would you please explain reasons a bid is rejected or an entire bid is rejected? Paul says design. Brian says stay within the budget. Okay. So lots of good information there, what a contractor is agreeing to. Chuck asked a good question. Why is a project rejected? And so if we go back to the process that we're looking at here, there can be a number of reasons why a project is rejected. And they often involve this issue right here. Is the contractor that is the low bidder, are they responsible or responsive? And so there are a couple of things that can cause concern to an awarding agency or an owner agency. If that bid price is well outside of their engineer's estimate, a project may be rejected, and some problems with the project investigated. Why do contractors see the need for such a high price there? They may also not have had a bid bond properly executed. There could be a problem with the paperwork that the agency identifies that can reject a project. In my experience, the most common reason that we rejected projects in Tennessee is that the bids were somehow unbalanced, meaning that the prices bid for a certain item of work in the contract were not representative of the true cost. And so we may feel like the low bid contractor is trying to take an advantage of a bid error or a plans error or something like that. And so we would often reject that bid and try to correct the issue that we were seeing. So that is the most common reason that I've seen for contracts being rejected, is that through the bidding process, the owner agency has identified a problem with the project, and they have to take a step back and redo it. So I hope that's consistent with what your experience is. It's not often that happens, but it does occur from time to time. Good question. Thank you for that.
You got a couple
So,
of in the chat. Dirk Duper said project completion date.
Right. There's a number of things included in what our project definition is. So Lyle says the scope of work that should be identified to the contractor during the advertisement process. That proposal typically includes agency specifications, that design for the project. The dirty word to construction administration officials is a change order, and that can often cause our project to not remain within budget. There may be a contingency budget established in some contracts that provide for some unforeseen work that has to be done through that contingency. And yes, Brian, there is an emphasis on safety, and Dirk, absolutely correct. There is a contract completion date that the agency expects the contractor to meet. So the typical contract documents that make up those descriptions, they're contained in legal documents. There are also graphic documents that we've called plans, narrative documents that we've called specifications. So let's take a look at each one of those. So legal documents, and we consider that contract between the agency and contractor that legally binds those parties together, so that this is an agreement, and it is insured by a bid bond. This is issued by a construction insurance company, and it says that we know, the insurance company is basically saying, we know this contractor is qualified to bid on the work that they are bidding on, and if they are the low bidder selected by the agency, the contractor will enter into a contract. So that's like a guarantee that the contractor will enter into the agreement. There's also a performance bond that is required, and this typically is delivered after the low bidder is identified. And this is a mechanism to guarantee the contractor will perform the work. So this is delivered usually between the bidding and the notice to proceed. There may also be a labor and materials bond. This ensures that the contractor pays their subs or suppliers in order to pass along the payment that the contractor receives from the owner to their subordinates. And there's also liability insurance requirements that you want this contractor to be responsible for the things that are being implemented out there. And if there's civil action or something like that that comes against the project, that contractor is insured against it. So those are legal documents. So the graphic documents that are provided in that contract include the plans. This is a graphical description of what's to be built with the location, character, dimensions, layouts, profiles, cross sections. It's been built based on a survey of the existing land contours and is intended to be built according to those land contours as well. You also have some standard plans that may be brought into the project through notes or something like that. And then project plans are unique to that specific project. So that is where the nuts and bolts of the design work is completed, try to identify utility conflicts and that sort of thing in that, and make sure the grades and slopes are going to work out in that built environment. So you get good drainage, all that sort of thing is included. Graphical documents are also we mentioned standard plans. This is an example from Nevada where they include standard bridge drawings, roadway design drawings, and traffic design drawings. So these might be implemented across the state for a given situation, and through the project plans, those could be called into effect. The project plans are very specific, so they're built specifically for that project, and because of that, they carry a lot of weight in the design or in the construction contract. So they basically represent graphic directions to the contractor. They are similarly organized to the standard plans, but there's differences in the beginning of the plans for a location sketch. They also include bid items and quantities that are typically called out in the plans. And they also include what I like to call general notes and special notes. And those are, if I'm a contractor bidding a project, that is one of the pages of the plans that I'm going to pay put particular emphasis on to make sure I understand what the organization is telling me about that project that applies. So design assumptions, it may have pavement thicknesses, typical sections, slopes on the roadway, that sort of thing. So there are some go-by specs there provided from the FHWA. Those can be referenced by you if you're interested. All right, so let's go back to the typical contract documents. We also have narrative documents, and that's a whole subset of the items that are required. So let's take a look at those. This is typically where our specifications are, and those are written out as provisions and requirements for performing the prescribed work. They consist of standard specifications that are common to most projects, supplemental specifications, which are updated standards. So those you may have a different supplemental specification issued with each sequential letting as time passes and the agency identifies revisions to their standards. Those typically go in supplemental specs. There may also be developmental specs or required contract provisions that are included in that contract. These are developmental specs are typically things that the agency is thinking about moving toward, and they want to try a few things, but there may be special provisions concerning that contract as well. A good example of that is the liquidated damages for missing the completion date is typically set on a project by project basis. So lots of specifications. When you look at how these are put together, they're usually listed as general requirements. That may be the overall scope and scale of what the specification covers. Then there will be construction details and material details. So what are we going to be building? How does that work? And then what are the material requirements for that? What's the compaction requirement for the soil? Or what is the type of steel required for this type member? So that is how the specifications are typically laid out. So a question for you here, which take precedence? I think I have a poll. Nicole, can you help me with that?
Sure. For 1 second.
Yep. Which contract documents take precedence? And so we have what if there's a discrepancy among the documents? So the question is, a project typical section plan sheet shows that a mixture should be installed at 3 inches thick. However, the standard specification says that the mixture should be placed no more than 2.5 inches thick. So that's a discrepancy in our contract language. Which document takes precedence to determine the thickness? And your choices there are supplemental notices, special provisions, project plans, standard specifications, or standard plans. So I'll give you a hint. The two documents that are in discrepancy are the standard specification and a project plan sheet. I'll give you a little bit of advice here. We've listed those options as the most important from top to bottom. So supplemental notices, those things that come out between the advertisement and the bid. Special provisions are developed for each project and are project specific. Project plans, again, are specifically developed for each project. The standard specifications are intended to cover a wide range of projects, and then standard plans come last. Those are also intended to cover a large number of situations. So if we have a discrepancy, and I'm not saying we ever want to have a discrepancy, but if we do, it's important that the contractor and the construction administrator have a way to work through that discrepancy. And so in this instance, project plans would control. They have the most relevance to that project, and there may be something that designer, that specification writer is thinking that, okay, in this instance, I need a mixture to be placed at 3 inches rather than 2.5. So the project plans would take precedence there. So that is the correct answer. So another component of contract administration may be public outreach. This may occur to alert the public to what is happening with the project. Often there's a project website or a project information office located on the project for a high profile construction project that's being implemented. So the contract may require the designer, the agency, the contractor to enter into this kind of arrangement to provide a public outreach plan. There may be, I'm thinking of the bridge project that's happening there between Louisville and Ohio. I think the Ohio River project is one of those high profile projects where there's a lot of public interest, and there may be a public outreach component requiring parties to give updates at a set time. We're also thinking about environmental requirements. These are commitments that the agency makes in order to justify a project being built. It may be a requirement for dealing with historic artifacts, important graves. It may be environmental requirements for stormwater runoff. A stormwater pollution prevention plan is often included as one of the requirements. Environmental permitting may be required. So there are commitments included in that contract that the contractor has to take on the responsibility of complying with those provisions, just like the state agency does. There may also be labor laws that are included in the contract provision, like certified payrolls to ensure that wage requirements are being met. There may also be disadvantaged business entity requirements that are included, that are goals for including disadvantaged businesses in your contracts. Many agencies have those. So these are all what we consider to be contract provisions and requirements of entering into that contract. So in essence, that contract between the contractor and the agency is an agreement. And so once that agreement is signed, it has to be implemented and enforced. And that occurs through the construction administration process. So that's the next segment of our work here. So if you can imagine, administering construction is often about documenting the items of work that are included in that project and how that gets done. So here's a chat question for you. If you can respond in the chat pod, I would appreciate it. What system does your agency use for documenting project administrative requirements? This can be a number of off-the-shelf products. It can also be ad hoc, kind of a field book, if you will. But typically in every project, as you administer that contract and the construction process, you're looking at documenting how the work gets done. So anyone with experience in project administrative documentation? Very common response for state DOTs is the site manager program that AASHTO developed. That is the program that I am most familiar with. Not seeing many any responses, as a matter of fact. So we'll chalk that up to being a introductory course here. Most DOTs have a documentation manual. So as you're thinking about administering a statewide program or a federal program, there have to be guidelines so that the work is documented in a similar fashion. And so that builds consistency between construction offices, the resident engineers, the lead inspectors. It also builds expectations for the contractor that this is how I'm going to be documenting my work. These are the tickets that I need to provide. This is how my estimate for the work that I've completed this month gets processed. And it serves as a reference for the resident engineers, the field office personnel, and inspectors in order to do that work. So the inspecting resident engineer, the person that's responsible for constructing that project from an owner's standpoint, is responsible for implementing those procedures. So that's a Nevada example. I'm sure that the Transportation Cabinet has one as well. It provides for contractor submittals. These are items that are not included in the specific design of the project, but are components that the contractor is required to submit and to adhere to. So these may be the specific materials that the project is going to be built out of, the safety plans that are required for their employees and practices, shoring plans, that sort of thing for how the work is going to be implemented, what their schedule is. And so, as was mentioned early, there's a completion date that contractors are held to. So they're ensuring that the project can be built within that schedule. What are the benchmarks there? What do we have to have completed in order to get to the next critical item of work? There are also key certifications that are required for traffic control supervisors or a roadway inspector or roadway production supervisor that are included. And there's that stormwater pollution prevention plan. So any borrow sites that the contractor is operating will have to have a document like that as well. So several things that the contractor has to submit.
You have a couple answers to your question in the chat box.
Great. Thank you, Brian. I see agency proprietary management software. Chuck says project book, field book, Microsoft SharePoint. Good. Yes, all very good ways of sharing information and documenting what it's done in the field. One of the other ways to do that, the way we were all trained, perhaps, I'm in my 50s. We had project diaries, and so that was a paper written document that the resident engineer and their inspection team kept. It included a lot of inspection reports, and so that may detail specifically what is going on with these. I see that several of you have experience with these. Let's take a look at a daily diary report. So if we're looking at this report, it identifies what the contract number is, what the date is, where that is, if this is a working day contract. Did I hear a question? Thought I did. So there's a working day identified there. What's the temperature on the project? Sort of gives an identification of who is providing the report, where it may be. But there are several components listed in that diary. Let's look at that. So the first part gives a general narrative of what's going on that day. Arrived at the asphalt plant at 6:30. Contractor fired up shortly after that. See another report for that piece. They're placing turnouts. It looked pretty good. There's a subcontractor on the project looking for certs for the epoxy. Both the Silver Book 623 and 636 are in play. So that was an issue identified that day in the inspection report. Came to be. It also mentions some protocols that were conducted that day, talking about the asphalt content test, the results for a specific density test given there. There's also identification of special visitors to the project. That's always of interest. If you go out onto the project, people are typically asking you to, well, who are you? Why are you here? What are you doing? So that can be noted in the project diary who visited that day. And we also see here an identification of the contractor asked a question. So ask Steve as to when he would be providing the profilograph. He indicated doing some automatics were working properly, but there's an issue with that. So this diary is it's a report of what happened that day. We identified some issues, contractors working to get through some things. I worked out issues with the some of my inspection team and what was happening there. So lots of things are happening in that daily diary that document what happened in the project. I read a Tom Clancy book, and it was one of the ideas that came out of the debt of honor, I think it was, when the stock market crashed. And this was imaginary. I don't want to scare anyone. But the solution was if the trades did not get documented, they did not occur. So that's the way a lot of people think about construction administration is if we didn't get the process documented well, it did not occur. So another piece of that is field books, where you're providing evidence or documenting the process for bid items incorporated in the work, and serving as documentation for contractor payments. And so the old way of doing these would typically outline where material was delivered, when it was delivered, what time, the truck, where it was placed, what station of work that goes to. So inspectors documenting that work, identifying where the process is and how it's being implemented in the project. So the third poll question that I have deals with communications. And one of the ways that we establish those common expectations between a contractor and an agency is through a pre-construction meeting or conference. So the question for you is, does your agency conduct a pre-construction conference or meeting? So if you would answer that question, I would appreciate it. The options are never. 2, usually hold an informal conversation. 3, sometimes there's a threshold for size complexity. 4, often, or 5, always, no matter the size, complexity, or budget.
And I'll give y'all about a minute to answer that before I close the poll.
I like what Martha said early about communications on a project and how important that is. It can't be overdone. Communications are so important that we get right.
I'm going to end the poll and share the results. There we go.
Great. So we're pretty well distributed there. 4 out of 9 of you are saying always. 2 say often. 1 says sometimes. And 2 additional say usually hold an informal conversation. My preference would be to implore you to always have a pre-construction meeting. Those are so important in establishing a common understanding of the project, what your expectations are. Communications can be done through that pre-construction conference, also through staff meetings, often frequent communication with the contractor. The first communication that you have with someone on that project should not be when you have a problem. Trying to establish a working relationship, not only with the contractor, but the local businesses and citizens across the spectrum there. Stakeholder communications are advisable, providing updates to your board, commission, those areas. And public meetings as required. Those may be a part of your contract depending on how many instances you have there, or what the incentives are, what the risk is. We have a number of stakeholders, businesses along the route, the traveling public, contractors working in the area. All of these folks need to be coordinated with during construction administration. There are also environmental considerations. I know we're closing in on the top of the hour. I want to try to get to our next topic at least. So be familiar with the environmental constraints, who to contact if there are issues. Those are important. Environmental concerns with construction administration. The final topic I want to cover are claims and disputes. And so a claim is defined as a formal demand for compensation made by one party to a contract to another party in accordance with the contract document. So there are claims are anticipated and planned for. It should be represented in the specifications with how to proceed with a claim. These are not gotcha moments. This should be a known process where the contractor notifies the owner or the engineer before any contested work begins. If the claim is denied, there should be a dispute resolution process. There may also be a change implemented by the agency, which identifies something of a changed condition in the contract environment that needs to be changed. So again, trying to identify that early and often. The best defense is a good offense. So as you can expect, proper documentation throughout the project is the way to resolve claims and disputes. And again, these are not intended to be personal attacks or gotcha moments by either party. Entities have to work through disputes sometimes. So that is important. Use the documentation that you have to determine the events and establish a fair outcome. Often a contractor is due additional funding. And the question here is, what documentation is most helpful for quickly and fairly resolving claims? I would say that project diary, field book, that documentation that we've kept. Tips for preventing claims: do excellent contract document preparation. Plan for those unexpected or out of the ordinary situations. Have good, properly articulated project expectations. Communicate early, often, and respectfully. Do it in a timely manner to try to not kick the can down the road and establish a delay point and enable your folks to make fast and fair decisions. There is a partnering concept that a lot of agencies move into. It's a formal process that promotes good communication and promotes the refinement of that claim process so that contractors can ask questions and get answers very quickly so that they're not impeded. So in summary, got a few questions for you there. Nicole, I will turn the presentation back over to you. We're at the top of the hour.
Okay.
I appreciate being here, and I hope I have whetted your appetite for what construction administration is about, and have given you a little bit more information on what you can expect in dealing with those inspection teams and contractors.
Thank you so much, Greg. We appreciate your presentation. Very good information. If anybody has any questions for him, now would be a good time to take yourself off mute or put your question in the chat box. Anybody have any questions, comments before we move on to closing out the class?
Nicole, this is Brian Sloan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't have a question so much as a comment to Greg that I'm not a DOT employee. As a matter of fact, I'm retired. I retired last year from a natural gas distribution company here in Kentucky. Some of you know Columbia Gas of Kentucky. Then I worked for them for over 35 years. What I want to mention, though, is the concepts that Greg discussed and the structure of the project management that he talked through is very similar to the approach that we took at the gas company when we were preparing for more larger projects. We had the more common everyday stuff, but then the larger projects had to take on these concepts that Greg discussed. And so just want to mention, you know, I have worked with a lot of the DOT, or I have worked with the KDOT and ODOT for that matter, and I'm familiar with the concepts he described there, but they also overlap into other industries.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Brian.
Mm-hmm.